Right, so we're about to get some fireworks, I think. We've got a debate on the future of platforms. But the first thing we need to do is have a vote, just to level set a bit. Okay, so this is the debate. The House view is this House believes that scale is critical for investment platforms and that we won't see a proliferation of advisor-owned platforms. Right, Slido, NWL 23, if we put it up now, thank you. So we'd like you to vote for or against. Ed's going to get a little overconfident before we get started here. It's really important that we figure out where we are at the beginning and where we are after, to not only understand what the House view is, but also to understand if they've been able to persuade you. We calling it? We calling it? Okay, 64-36. So now we'll see if Ed and, 64, 37, 36. Okay, we're saying it 36. So at the end, we'll read you the vote and see if anyone's been persuaded one way or the other. Now, Money Marketing ran this poll on their website on Friday. And when I last looked, it's not exactly the same. The wording's slightly different. You can see a little bit less favorable towards the future being about advisors having their own platforms. This is a hugely important topic. We did a report in January called The Great Platform Shakeout to look at this trend of advisor-owned platforms. And there's definitely appetite from some pockets of the market. And the question is, what does the future hold? And it's always difficult to gaze into a crystal ball. But we're going to have a debate about it now. So our debaters have 10 minutes each to make their case, and then they have 4 minutes for a rebuttal. 5 minutes? 55. And then 4 minutes each for a rebuttal. And then we'll redo that poll and see where we got to. And the loser of the debate will walk away with a dinosaur tail. The stakes are high. The stakes are high. Ed, good luck.
My kids actually really want the dinosaur tail. So if I lose, I've got 2 kids who'll be very happy. So it does feel a little bit like being back at school doing a debate. I've done this for 25 years. So so first of all, thank you, Heather, and good afternoon, everyone. So Heather actually said 4 things to me before this session, actually none of which she told Dave or I about at all before we signed up for it. The first thing she said is she could not think personally of a more terrifying session to have to run, and she would hate to do it. The second thing she said was, it's right after lunch, which is probably the worst time to actually have to do this as well. And so she said it could be a really tough time to do it. And then thirdly, no more pressure, she said it'd be really helpful if Dave and I could try and make it funny. So she's worried it's a slightly dry subject. So judging by these first 3 points, Heather, please do not consider a career switch as a motivational coach in any way at all. Lastly, Heather said that she would not recommend that I do some sort of elaborate, slightly irrelevant introduction, as I might quickly find I'm running out of time. Bugger. So I guess in the next 9 minutes, what I will do is try and argue the case for why I do not believe that we will see a proliferation of advisor-owned platforms, and that why I believe that scale will continue to matter in the platform market. And actually, I say that as an individual who's not only worked at 2 of the largest platforms in the UK, but also actually works for a financial planning business where we do actually run our own platform, and we provide a platform as a service to other firms as well. So maybe, interesting choice in terms of speaker, Heather as well. So, however, actually, first of all, what I thought we would do is actually talk about something that Dave and I think probably firmly agree on. And actually, that is the fact that we believe, I think both of us, that the majority of the platform market is probably not fit for purpose, and actually has hardly progressed in the last 10 years. And actually, you could argue that as an industry, whilst we may have seen some being the nucleus of innovation, I think much of it, unfortunately, has maybe disappeared like a needle in a James Hay haystack. I couldn't resist. Sorry, Dave. So today, I think many platforms do not integrate into the advisor ecosystem. They don't provide the service support we are, as advisors, that we require, and they seem to spend more time wanting to engage with our end clients rather than deliver the tools an advisor practice actually requires. And when I first worked in advisor platforms 20 years ago, the market was innovating, it was delivering a service which actually really did fix a problem, and actually focused on being a service and not a product. Actually, I think, if we were honest, in the last 10 years, we've not seen much in the way of innovation in platforms. And so actually, for our business, a poorly integrated platform probably effectively adds around 20 basis points to the cost of us running our advice business. And actually, that really doubles the cost of the platform. There are a few exceptions who get that right, but that actually is not the majority. So Dave, I think you and I will actually agree on one thing, that much of the platform market is not fit for purpose, and there's a need for better innovation, and there's probably room for new models. However, and coming back to the argument, I am not convinced that the answer is a proliferation of advisor-owned platforms. It's not because I'm trying to patronise. I saw those words in Citywire, any IFA who wants to say they're not competent to run a platform business. But actually, I think when people really look at it, they might question whether it's a viable option. And I've got 5 simple reasons why I think this trend is going to be more limited. Number one, as much as Dave, you and I are going to agree of the state of the platform market, I do not think simply owning the platform fixes the issue around integration or, in reality, puts the advisor in any more control. Some models might purport to do this and help, but actually all it's really doing is shifting the problem to the advice business itself. And actually, it makes it the advisor's problem. If actually the platform did a better job in integrating into the advisor's business model and actually delivering the model we require, then that would remove much of this debate. I think also the control point is somewhat false. If, as an advisor, you actually launch your own platform, you are still going to be engaging with a single provider. And so actually you are going to be highly reliant on one service. So actually you've not really got much in terms of more control. You've actually got significant reliance on a single provider. And actually if it doesn't work, has anyone tried to re-platform? The market is full of a history that proves it's quite complex. So if you really want to take control of your proposition as an advisor, start at the front end. Look at the front end of your business, looking at CRM, practice management, client portals, mobile apps. It's the way you're going to drive more value in your business. The second point then is regulation. Most advice businesses that we work with and know say there's too much regulation in the advice sector. Running your own platform brings you into a whole volume of new requirements, new regulations, more capital, more senior management functions. And whilst some businesses can navigate that by potentially looking at becoming an appointed rep, the FCA has already started to look at that model to say where it's being used purely as a means for bypassing some of the inducement rules and collect additional fees, there are question marks over that. The regulatory model is also interesting because most of the models on offer supporting this platform as a service take no regulatory responsibility. As an advisor, you will find yourself with a host of new regulations. And for actually anyone who's had to deal with things such as ACARA over the last 12 months, you'll know just how complex that is. The third point I was going to make is around focus. Sage advice always says focus on what you're good at, and then what you focus on will grow. Financial planners are great at managing client relationships, coaching clients, helping to realize goals and dreams. Suddenly, owning the platform and all the associated technology is going to add more complexity and will reduce focus on what you're really good at. And as much as you can outsource some of this, you will need technology and operations and savvy individuals to run, oversee, plan, and engage on that technology. NextWealth, I think, surveyed a year or so ago advice businesses on their technology and operational support. And I think, Heather, it's right that I think it was 84% of advice firms employ no technology individuals at all. You're going to need, if you run this model, you are going to need senior, experienced technology resource to employ that model. The fourth point I was going to make is the basic economics of the model. Currently, platforms average at around 20 to 25 basis points as an average charge. If you assume it might take you to outsource that model a cost of 10 basis points, once you've overlaid the cost of oversight, operations, everything that goes around it, you might be left with 10 basis points of margin, that being generous. So if you did have £1 billion of assets, you might only make £1 million of profit. And whilst that might sound quite interesting, think about what additional risks you're carrying and how much less focus you'll have on it. If there's an error on the platform, you're likely to carry the regulatory responsibility. If it's a complaint, it's yours. An operational issue, yours to resolve. These are all costs that you'll carry, you'll need to plan and think about. We also hear lots and lots of feedback around advisors saying if they own their own platform, it will improve their valuation when they come to sell. So as benchmark, we've bought just short of 40 advice businesses over the last few years. So let me explain how we think about that as a consolidator of IFA businesses. We love businesses we can easily consolidate and align to our model. And actually, those businesses that look more like ours, we pay a premium for. When we value a business, we look at both the direct benefits that are incurred within the business, but also any synergies that we can attract. That also includes the adoption of our solutions. We do not, and have not to date, and we will not in the future, pay for a premium for businesses that have their own in-house platform. And in fact, we've had cases over the last few years where we've looked at businesses where they've run in-house platforms and it's actually reduced the valuation because it's become a dis-synergy. Because it's extra cost, extra complexity of the business, and it requires a relationship to be unwound. The economic point also has to look at the natural competition within the platform market. As platforms continue to compete and grow scale, the price points will continue to reduce. This will reduce the attractiveness of owning your own platform. Platforms are now trending towards 15 basis points and below. And if you look at the US market, the platforms, which are dominated by a handful of very large scale platforms, are now sub 10 basis points. So this will start to diminish the economic argument. Lastly, and I think this is really important, which is especially for advice businesses which value independence, I don't believe there's any way you can successfully integrate and place the majority of your business on a platform without being restricted. That might be right, and that might be the right balance for some businesses. However, with so much criticism over vertically integrated models, especially where they charge higher than the market rate, it would be somewhat hypocritical for some advisors to take the, well, if you can't beat them, join them mentality and suddenly trying to boost profitability just by adopting your own solution. I don't believe there's anything wrong with restricted advice. We run a restricted advice business ourselves, but I do think some IFA practices will find that too hard to justify. So in summary, I think there's 5 reasons why I don't believe there'll be a proliferation of advice practices running their own platform and why scale will matter. 1, it doesn't really fix the problem. Secondly, the weight of regulation. The third, the focus and the reduction in focus on what actually financial plans are really good at. The 4th point, economics. And then the 5th point, reluctance to be restricted. And if you don't take my word for it, just going back to that money marketing article, which said 72% of people polled agree with me. So over to you, Dave.
And the case against the house view, David Ferguson.
Right. Can anyone name a really brilliant scale platform in the UK? Okay. So I was going to sit down. I'm reminded of Upton Sinclair's view that it's difficult to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. And oddly enough, that argument doesn't apply today because Ed's firm, as he'd already said, doesn't actually operate to the house view. And not only that, the house is starkly at odds with much of today's retail market. None of the large wealth firms, the Rathbones, the Brewin Dolphins, the HLs, the SJPs, the Evelyns, etc., none of them operate third-party platforms. I could probably list 50 other firms in the same boat. And tellingly, really tellingly, buy the platform tech and operations at a cost of perhaps 25% of what an advisor's client might be paying today. So on what premise or authority does this house have to deny smaller firms that competitive advantage? There's a couple of great examples in other industries. Stripe made online payments easily and affordably available to millions of smaller firms. Shopify did the same for e-commerce. Why can't a Seckle or a Hubwise do the same thing for financial planners? Well, Seckle anyway. The technology's moved on, and things can only get better when the thinking does the same. And this house remains stuck in the past, I think captured actually by product providers. So a question for you, is financial planning about products or is it about people? I ask you to raise your hand if you think it's about products. Okay. That, unfortunately, is the perspective of the house. Now, financial planning is a blend of high-touch human activity and more tech, non-human activities. And the human work is, of course, the bit that really matters. And we know that doesn't really scale, but the non-human bits can absorb more load, but must meet and align to the same standards. And maybe this didn't matter before. Maybe pre-COVID, this is a 95% offline activity, 5% online. But it's much more of a 50-50 now, and maybe even going beyond that. And a platform mustn't compromise the human work, meaning it must be high quality and low cost and as efficient as possible. It cannot be subject to provider inefficiency. None of you thought we had a large-scale platform that was any good in the UK. And it can't be exposed to the whims of a shareholder changing their mind just because it can. And I think this debate ultimately is about alignment. When I think about alignment, I regress to my studies. Any platform selection, any product provider selection is a three-person game. You, your client, and the platform operator. I don't know if there's any mathematicians in the room. Those who are will know that in such a three-person game, it is mathematically certain that two will collude against a third. And the house view encourages advisors to align with providers against their clients. And I reject that view and urge you to do likewise today. The house fundamentally believes that advisors should favor compromise over control. It considers advisor technology has already reached good enough. It views it to be designed entirely around client interest, and it thinks advisor firms are as strong online as they ever will be. And I just don't think any of that is true. To the advisors in the room, and with apologies to any sponsors I'm about to name here, these are real names, but they're kind of made up for the purpose. Would you have Embark hire and organize your team? Would you have Aviva design your office environment? Would you have Aberdeen write your suitability reports? Would you have an old pension company or a screwed up asset manager run your key infrastructure? Technology's moved on and you no longer need to compromise. And it seems to me the house favors analog over digital. It suggests that the current model in some way is acceptable and will endure. And even Ed in his opening remarks kind of pointed out nothing interesting's happened, and I think he said in a decade. We're kind of suggesting that things like digital signatures are innovative in some way. The dismal offline service with handoff after handoff is okay. We accept that the online experience in a £20 a month app is materially superior to that of your £200,000 advised client. It seems to me the house favours high cost over low fees. To the advisors in the room, I think you're being played. Why have the sector's scale benefits not flowed to your clients? And it's because the sector exploits your inertia. Some platforms in this space are obviously better than others, but I don't see that your key infrastructure can be owned and controlled by firms who are intrinsically misaligned with the great work you do and with your client interest. Rather than see value for money as a key commercial and regulatory consideration, the house views it as a matter to be ignored and overlooked, maybe even dismissed. It considers a 400% markup on outsourced technology and operations to be okay, and just to be ignored. It welcomes dire procurement and vendor management. It invites legacy technology and stifled innovation. It champions broken delivery promises again and again. This house celebrates kind of corporate bloat and shareholder expectations that drive 75% of the cost that your clients are paying. It puts provider value creation before client outcomes. So I think you're being played. If you don't believe me, why is probably the market leader in the brilliant business in Integrafin? In recent years, that firm has enjoyed a 54% fall in operating costs in basis point terms, but reduced pricing by just 32%. The other main listed entity reduced costs by 20% and reduced price by just 8%. And the reason that happens is because they've told their shareholders they're going to make a 40% margin and get a Hargreaves Lansdown-like valuation. That's what's going on here. So some questions for advisors. How much control do you have today to establish online excellence or any degree of differentiation? How much control can you exercise over your client journeys online? When did a legacy platform last deliver a step change in your client experience, a positive one? Are you okay? Are you okay carrying the suitability and reputational risk of a platform cashing in at your client's expense? Just last week, Aegon effectively announced a 50% increase in its platform fee by starting to retain interest on cash, leaving you to rationalize that to your clients. Your problem, we're going to do it anyway. The company explanation, we've identified that the interest paid on cash has become out of line with what it was designed to achieve. Like, is anyone buying this junk? I mean, So remember, providers don't want you in control. They spent 20 years fighting back against the great strides initiated by magnificent Ian Taylor and Mike Howard when they launched Transact. It's been a 20-year push back against that. And people will cite a requirement for technology expertise, or they'll incite fear over the regulatory burden. They tell you it's too hard, else why isn't everyone else doing this? And they would say that. And if you're an advisor firm, your team does most of the work already, except with this kind of corporate bloat in the middle, rather than straight to the tech provider. I'd urge you to seek out better service and higher standards and less of a round trip for issue resolution. The reality is, as the technology's moved on, you can launch a platform in months without writing a single line of code or even hiring anyone new. They'll tell you it's not worth it, a lot of hassle for a few basis points. They would say that. Ed, in fact, quoted the number I have prepared right in front of me. I think it misses the point. For a start, to say 10 basis points across the advised platform sector is £600 million of your clients' money every year, forever. More importantly, this is about stripping away a redundant, complacent, and misaligned layer that's holding you back. I think you should free yourself from providers that compromise and undermine your client experience. And it's not about taking on regulatory risk, it's about managing your regulatory risk. You already have a massive responsibility. Never mind the consumer duty, think about your professional duty. It's not about whether each approach is easy or hard. Someone remarked to me yesterday, some people are assuming that because they've found this hard, expensive, and inefficient, then so it must be for everyone else. A while back, probably a decade ago or so, if I remember correctly, Transact, Nucleus, and Eccentric had a combined AUA of about £20 billion. Must be 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And at the same time, Standard Life, Wrap, and Elevate were around the same combined size. An industry expert who went by the name of, presumably still does, Ned Cazalet at the time, noted at the time these two groups had assembled the same size of business. And Ned noted at the time the provider cohort had burnt through 100 times the amount of capital of the more progressive group. 100 times. 100 times more. And your clients are paying for it to this day. I remember Wrap platforms were challenged for being too transparent. It was a big regulatory change, and probably £1 billion of shareholder capital later, some older players remain, but some have yet to regain relevance. One of them has been in net outflows for the best part of a decade. To probably slightly dangerously paraphrase Hemingway, how did you lose relevance? Two ways, gradually, then suddenly. And I think this is about delivering the kind of online service that is now the baseline expectation in every other industry, the baseline. Your client experience requires an online excellence that at least matches the offline, at least matches it. So don't compromise, that's the house view. Don't remain analog, that's the house view. Don't be a mule for high fees, that would be the house view. Do promote alignment and do promote better. Take control, be truly digital and lower costs. Vote against the house and give me a call. Yeah.
Right. Each of our speakers now has an opportunity for rebuttal. Ed. You'll have to stand up for this one, I'm afraid.
So I thought in the second part, I will try and come back on some of those points, but also I thought maybe I'd also outline a little bit in terms of, I guess, what I believe will happen as well. So really what I thought maybe to spend a bit of time on was some of the market trends and actually where do I think the market will go as a result. So I do believe actually that we will see some IFA platforms launch. What I just don't see is this proliferation. And I do see the need for scale to support those models. So yeah, I think there'll be tens of new platforms. I just don't think there'll be hundreds and thousands of them. And to be clear, I really do think that some of the work, the likes of Seckle, the SEIs, people like Fundment are starting to innovate and start to do things differently. I also believe, actually, we've not yet seen the next generation of platforms. Over the next 5 years, what we'll start to see is the emergence of new technology, probably blockchain-based, which will allow us to innovate faster and further. And this next wave of innovation will actually start to be the game-changing disruption that the platform market needs. So what do I actually think will happen in the market? The first thing is I do think the majority of the larger advice businesses that have not adopted their own platform, so those with over 5 billion of assets, I think will start to consider their own platforms. So I do agree with that. But that is 10, 15 businesses in the UK. And actually, many of them are already on that journey and have already announced stuff. I do think actually those that are private equity backed as well, which actually a lot of them are those larger businesses. I think the private equity backed consolidation market, where they have got £5 billion of assets or they have ambitions to get there, they probably will also have to look at their own platform as well, because the economic case for IFA consolidation and the hurdle rates around debt these days will be challenged unless they find additional revenue lines. So again, I do think there's an opportunity for some advisors to launch their own platform. You'll also see some consolidation in the consolidator market, and that is happening now as well. I also think there's an opportunity in the fintech and startup market where they will embrace their own platforms. And I think the likes of Seckle have been pretty successful in targeting that sector. However, history will show few of those businesses will scale, and they're not necessarily into the long term. I think the existing platform market becomes interesting, and you absolutely will have to see a shift towards more digital models. So those that deliver poor service, that are poor integrated, they will be the ones that advisors will consolidate away from. And that's the opportunity for the traditional platform market. And those platforms actually do a good job to help advice practices, help our productivity, will win. We had an example where one of our admin teams spent 16 hours with one platform on a single client issue. That means for that client, we will make no money whatsoever. So again, going back to this point, these platforms can do a better job. We will definitely see a need for platforms to offer more integration, better use of APIs, absolutely, to Dave's point, embrace digital, greater customization of experiences. That will become the standard, and those platforms that do not will become the legacy. And no longer do I want to see platforms suddenly announce that they've launched a new app to engage with our clients. Instead, I want them to talk to us about how they're going to enable our experiences. And I do not want my platform partners to be talking to my customers about cross-selling car insurance. We definitely will start to see the next generation of platforms coming in the next 5 years. They're not in the market today. And I think today's platforms that are innovating are really innovating on yesterday's model. Those that really use distributed ledger technology will start to disrupt the platform market more fundamentally, but actually the investment management market more broadly as well. So I think if there's 30 or so IFA platforms today, there's 10,000 advice businesses. I think the IFA platform market will reduce from further consolidation, and we might see 20 or 30 IFA platforms emerge over the next few years. But to me, that's not proliferation. That's only 0.3% of the market. And those platforms and those advice businesses will need to scale in order to operate those platforms. So I think there might be a great opportunity for the likes of Seckle and the SEIs of this world, but I do not see we'll see a significant volume of advisors launch their own platform. In fact, the fact there is actually also 10 firms, the likes of Seckle, targeting the space, it's also highly competitive, and it's very unclear who's going to win. And you'll need deep pockets, scale, to back up those models. So back to you, Dave.
Right. Okay. So I think advisors are launching their own platforms. It's evidential in our business. I think our business today, and I'm sure the guys at SS&C, and I've heard some of the more legacy platforms chat with us as well. We're probably speaking to 150 firms just now. I'm sure if that's extrapolated across the market, maybe a few hundred firms are having these conversations, and some of them will be the same firms. I recognise that. I think there's a general agreement that something much better is required. Where we are today in the sector is just not good enough. I'll come back to my point about alignment, really. Who is motivated to make this better? And the person with the customer relationship who cares about the customer rather than about their corporate exit or share price is the person who cares about making this work. And I think the point about scale is interesting. You hear a lot of people, we've been in this, I'm ancient, right? So there's been a lot of this for 30 years about scale is all that matters. And it's been really hard to demonstrate that a large asset management business is better than a small one. I can't see any evidence that a large platform business is any better than a small one necessarily. I think the work that, for example, Fundment do is wonderful. It's a small business at the moment. I'm sure with great success. I don't think you can extrapolate that it's going to definitely be worse than XYZ £80 billion platform just because. I buy the point to some extent about funding and commercial support, but equally I remember hearing that. I'll refer you back to my comment about Standard Life and AXA against Transact, Nucleus and Eccentric. With the right orientation, the right focus, and the right way of doing things, I don't think that's necessarily such a massive barrier to success. I think what we'll see happening is scale occurring in the back end of these things. At the moment, we've probably got 28 advisor platforms, And we might have 100 wealth management platforms sitting on businesses like SEI and et cetera. And I think that 28 number will fall dramatically, or the ones that are relevant, the ones that remain competitive will fall dramatically. And I think we'll end up with a series of what I might call operating systems sitting behind the market, which might be SEI, FNZ, SS&C, SECL, hopefully, as part of that. And I don't think you have to have scale on the front end, because the actually really important bit of this is the connection with the clients, which does not have to be a scale activity. In the back end, absolutely. But the back end only scales properly if there's a kind of shared infrastructure and modern technology. And we talk a lot here about connectivity, and you hear a lot of people in the market talking about things like APIs. APIs are kind of being thrown around now all over the place as a sort of becoming, in some ways, a meaningless expression. Unless the technology is built from the ground up that way, you don't get the same benefit as if you stitch it on later and piece something together in some sort of after the event fashion. It doesn't work. You don't get the efficiency. You don't get the straight-through processing. You don't get the client experience. So I think you'll end up with a world where there will be materially more advisor platforms. I think for those firms who maybe don't have the infrastructure or the desire to do this, I think you'll see substantial innovation in the advisor tech space, where some of those firms will plug in a platform at the back end, and they'll realize that keying something into a CRM system, then turning around and keying it again into Transact or AJ Bell or whatever is a completely futile exercise. I was very taken by Ed's point that in his business, they reckon you can save 20 basis points in by having more integrated systems, or worse to that effect. Sorry if I've misquoted. That integration benefit is enormous, but it only works properly if the systems are API first rather than stitched together and someone's on a swivel chair keying it back in over here 10 minutes later. I would actually argue next model platforms are here. They may not be fully evolved. I kind of don't buy the blockchain thing. The biggest issue here is the corporate cost base of our organizations is outrageous and far beyond what clients need to pay. And nobody has made proper successful scaling of a platform business in this country. And I think that's something we should all hold our hands up to and frankly be ashamed of. And I will shut up at that point. Thanks, Ed. Enjoyed that.
Hannah, can we get the poll up? Right. Have Ed and Dave persuaded you? Either way, if everyone can vote, please. Right, I think we can call it. And Dave, despite persuading, what, 10%? Yeah, that's good. You win the tail.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic.